Most know that an herbivore is a creature that consumes plants. But among these diverse animals, a spectrum exists. On one end are the grazers, animals that prefer or even require grasses. On the other are the browsers, who feed on the leaves, shoots, and fruit of woody trees and shrubs. Some are exotic. Many are intimately familiar. Cows, goats, sheep, depending on us as their herders and caretakers just as we depend on them. Their feeding doesn't just sustain them. It sculpts plant communities, defining and maintaining whole habitats. This video is part of Floral Morals, a project that explores the plant kingdom in all its aspects. In this episode, we'll explore the spectrum of herbivores and their significance to habitats around the world. As I mentioned earlier, browsing and grazing form a spectrum, like most things in nature. These are human-made terms, created to help us understand the world, not hard categories with clear edges. In reality, most herbivores fall somewhere in the middle. So what drives this division in feeding strategies? Grasses are abundant and widespread. They grow quickly and they grow from the base of the plant in a region called the crown. That's where the meristematic cells are located. Those are the cells responsible for new growth. In most plants, those cells are located at the growing tips. That's why when we cut most plants, they stop growing. But when we mow a lawn again and again, the grass just keeps coming back. Grazers have taken evolutionary advantage of this design. But grass is tough. It's low in nutrients and full of fibrous material that's difficult to digest. Woody plants, by contrast, often offer softer leaves and richer nutrients, especially in their new growth. But they come with a cost. They're harder to reach, and they defend themselves with thorns and chemicals. Interestingly, grasses are a relatively young lineage. They first appeared in the late Cretaceous period, right around the time the dinosaurs disappeared. Before that, all herbivores were browsers, simply because there were no grasses to graze. But as grasses spread, they opened up a new ecological niche. Their resilience to repeated biting allowed for the rise of vast open plains, and with them, herds of large grazing animals. Grazers evolved broad, flat teeth and wide mouths for constant chewing. They also developed some of the most complex digestive systems in the animal kingdom. Most grazers are ruminants. They have multi-chambered stomachs that rely on microbial fermentation to break down the tough cellulose in grass. After swallowing it as a mouthful of grass, a grazer begins digestion in the rumen, then regurgitates it as cud, rechews it, and sends it back down for further breakdown. It's a slow process, but it's efficient. This lets grazers survive on a low-quality but incredibly abundant food source. Grazers are often stocky animals, built low to the ground, with heads down and mouths sweeping. Browsers, by contrast, have narrower snouts, allowing them to pick out tender leaves and young shoots with precision. Many rely on fermentation, not just in the rumen, but in enlarged ceca or colons, where microbes help detoxify chemicals and break down woody material. These digestive systems aren't just about extracting energy, they're about strategy, tolerating toxins, absorbing moisture, maximizing the benefits of riskier foods. Long legs and high shoulders help browsers reach into the canopy, giraffes being the ultimate example of how far these adaptations can go. I live near Etosha National Park in northern Namibia, and the contrast between grazers and browsers is on full display. On the grassy plains, you'll find huge herds of zebra and wildebeest, classic grazers. In the dense bush, you'll see giraffe and kudu browsing the trees and shrubs. Many species fall somewhere in between. Springbok and elephants, for example, are flexible feeders adapting to what the landscape offers. But perhaps the clearest contrast lies with rhinos. The white rhino is a grazer. Its wide, square mouth is built for feeding close to the ground. The black rhino, on the other hand, is a browser. It has a pointed, hooked upper lip and browses upright, plucking branches with precision. Even ancient people noticed this difference. At Tuifelfontaine, a sand rock carving shows the black rhino with its head raised, and the white rhino with its head low to the earth. A timeless observation, carved in stone long before science gave these animals their names. These patterns don't just exist here in Africa, they play out around the world. In North America, moose and white-tailed deer browse in the forest, while bison graze across the Great Plains. In Eurasia, red deer are woodland browsers, while wild horses graze the open steppe. In South America, tapir browse the jungle, while capybara graze by the riverbanks. And in Australia, koalas feed high up in the canopy on eucalyptus, while kangaroos graze the grasslands below. Across continents and climates, the feeding strategies of herbivores and the plants they eat shape the ecosystems they call home. So now let's pause our look at mammals and turn back to plants. What actually keeps them from being completely wiped out by herbivores? Plants invest energy into every leaf, and those leaves are what let them make more energy. If too many are eaten, the plant risks death. So how do they survive? Over time, the pressure of herbivory has driven plants to evolve a variety of defensive strategies. Just like we use the terms grazer or browser to help us understand herbivores, scientists group plant defenses into two main categories: resistance and tolerance. Resistance refers to traits that deter or prevent herbivory, like thorns, toxins, stinging hairs, or tough, unpalatable leaves. On the other hand, tolerance helps plants recover after damage. For example, some store extra sugar in underground tubers. That energy reserve allows them to regrow even if their above ground parts are chewed down. Tubers don't stop the bite, but they help plants bounce back. Grasses are a great example of both. Their tough, fibrous leaves discourage grazing, and because they grow from the base, not the tips, they can handle repeated bites without dying. Plant resistance strategies can be divided into physical and chemical defenses. The most obvious physical defense are thorns. Across southern Africa, acacias, specifically Vachellia species, have spines that can grow over 2.5 inches long. That's serious protection. Imagine trying to chew through something with 2.5-inch needles sticking out of it. But not all physical defenses are so dramatic and aggressive. Some are subtle and passive. Mopane trees, for example, have leaves loaded with lignin, a kind of biological glue that gives wood its strength. This gives the leaves a tough, leathery texture that's hard to chew, especially for younger or smaller herbivores. Mopane doesn't stop at lignin. It also deploys chemical defenses. These leaves are rich in tannins, bitter compounds found in plants worldwide, from oaks to grapevines. Tannins bind to proteins, making them harder to digest and less nutritious. Some defenses can even be triggered by attack. In African acacia species, tannin levels can rise within hours after browsing. Other plants produce essential oils rich in terpenes, compounds that smell pleasant to us but taste bitter or toxic to herbivores. Take camphor bush, Tarchonanthus camphoratus. Its leaves contain monoterpenes like cineol and fenchol. These not only taste bad, they can disrupt digestion by harming gut microbes. That's a problem for ruminants that rely on microbial fermentation. Interestingly, many of these properties have human uses. The antimicrobial compounds in camphor bush have long been used in traditional medicine to clean wounds and treat respiratory infections. The word tannin comes from the traditional leather tanning process because these plant compounds were essential to it. They bind to proteins in animal hides, just like they do in herbivore guts, making the leather more durable and resistant to decay. Some plants even take a more visual approach to defense. Certain succulents in the Orbea genus grow horizontal structures that resemble spines. They're actually soft, but from a distance they give off a sharp impression. And evolution, of course, never stops. As giraffes reach higher into the canopy, acacias grow longer spines. As herbivores develop ways to digest plant toxins, plants evolve stronger chemicals. This evolutionary feedback loop drives innovation on both sides, resulting in the rich biodiversity we see across the landscape today. Just as there is a long-term evolutionary relationship between herbivores and plants, there's also a more immediate dynamic relationship between herbivores and the ecosystems they inhabit. Herbivores are a driving force behind plant composition of an ecosystem, the types of plants present, and their relative abundance. In turn, the plant community determines what other species can thrive. The presence or absence of different herbivores can shape entire landscapes, tipping the balance between an open grassland or a woody thicket. Each habitat type supports its own cast of characters. Open grasslands are ideal for ground-dwelling birds like the northern black corehawn and secretary bird, small mammals like ground squirrels, and reptiles like the leopard tortoise. These areas will also allow more sunlight to reach the ground, favoring wildflowers and attracting pollinators. Predators like cheetahs depend on these open spaces to hunt. By contrast, dense thickets provide shelter and forage for species like the African gray hornbill, warblers, and a variety of caterpillars that rely on woody foliage. Thickets also provide cover for ambush predators like leopards and snakes such as the boomslang. Even the simple act of eating plants plays a deep role. Nutrients are cycled through dung, seeds dispersed, and hoofprints left behind even create microhabitats ideal for germinating seeds. Among all herbivores, perhaps the most dramatic landscape engineer is the African elephant. Elephants don't just browse, they topple trees, strip bark, and even dig water holes, profoundly altering the structures of an ecosystem. But in places like Etosha, Kruger, and other national parks, where elephants are confined by fences and drawn to permanent artificial water holes, their movement has become limited. Why move on when water is always nearby? The result is localized overbrowsing, a marked decline in tall trees, and loss of all the species that depend on them. Yet, elephants are also a keystone species, essential for maintaining the balance between bush and grassland. When allowed to move naturally, elephants help keep ecosystems in flux. Woody vegetation recovers, but isn't allowed to dominate. This balance maximizes biodiversity and thus resilience. At the other extreme is the phenomenon known as bush encroachment, when woody plants overtake grasslands. It's a widespread issue in Namibia. An estimated 45 million hectares, or roughly 1/3 of Namibian rangeland, is considered bush encroached. A balanced ecosystem contains a mix of herbaceous plants, like grasses and wildflowers, and woody shrubs and trees. This diversity supports more species and improves the carrying capacity of the land. Elephants help prevent bush encroachment, but they're not alone. So does fire, a natural force that periodically resets plant succession. It burns away brush, stimulates the regrowth of grasses, and recycles nutrients. But in landscapes shaped by human settlement, fire becomes a danger. Villages, fields, and infrastructure can't coexist with uncontrolled wildfires, so we suppress them. The more we settle, the less often fire is allowed to burn. And over time, without that regular disturbance, woody plants gain the upper hand. Grasslands shrink, thickets spread. In protecting ourselves from fire, we've also removed a key part of the ecological cycle that keeps savannas balanced. Another driver of bush encroachment is imbalanced herbivory. In many places, there are large herds of grazers like cattle, but few or no browsers like giraffes. Grazers keep mowing down grasses and forbs, while woody plants are left untouched and allowed to spread. This is common in conventional cattle pastures, where animals are confined to small fenced areas and wild browsers are excluded. Ironically, this practice reduces pasture quality, even for the livestock it's meant to support. So what's the solution? Once again, movement. A powerful example comes from Yellowstone National Park, where wolves were reintroduced in the 1990s. For decades, large elk herds had overgrazed riverbanks, decimating willow and cottonwood trees. While wolves did reduce elk numbers slightly, more importantly, they changed elk behavior. Elk moved more frequently, avoiding dangerous open areas. This allowed riverbank vegetation to regenerate, stabilizing soil, reducing erosion, and bringing back habitats for insects, birds, and fish, a phenomenon known as trophic cascade. So if predators move herbivores in the wild, can humans do the same? Yes, and in fact, they already are. Rotational grazing and seasonal herding are two different but equally powerful strategies. Rotational grazing is a managed system where land is divided into paddocks and livestock are moved on a schedule. This gives each area time to rest and regrow, mimicking the natural rhythm of wild herds in a modern, enclosed setting. Seasonal herding, on the other hand, follows older paths, moving livestock with the seasons, following rainfall and pasture growth across the landscape. It requires more space and traditional knowledge, but offers animals the chance to graze a wide variety of forage. Both systems encourage movement. Both give plants time to recover, improve soil health, and spread nutrients across the land. In essence, the cattle becomes the wildebeest, the goat the giraffe, the herder the wolf. So how do we apply all this? Can these ecological insights actually help us solve real-world problems? Two major issues stand in the way. First, the rise of industrial agriculture, specifically the grain livestock system that dominates global food production. Second, the deterioration of natural and semi-natural ecosystems, like rangelands and pastures, often due to unchecked bush encroachment. We've already seen how severe bush encroachment is here in Namibia, but now let's turn to the grain livestock system. In the United States, cropland totaled about 328 million acres in 2024, according to USDA. Of that, 38%, roughly 125 million acres, is used just to grow livestock feed. That's more land than France and Italy combined, or 3 times the size of all U.S. national parks. These industrial farms offer virtually no ecological value. They wipe out biodiversity in favor of cloned monocultures, corn, soy, or whatever the market demands. And in doing so, they strip the soil and pollute the water through aggressive tilling, heavy machinery, synthetic fertilizers, and pesticides. So how does this relate to everything I've said about herbivores? The solution lies inside the problem. As we've seen, herbivores are some of the most powerful forces in an ecosystem. They can degrade habitats or help restore them. So what if we started seeing domestic livestock as more than just sources of meat and milk? What if, instead of confining them to industrial feedlots, we managed them as active agents of ecosystem regeneration? Let's recap. On the grazer to browser spectrum, cattle are almost pure grazers. Goats are browsers, adapted for shrubby, woody plants. Pigs fill another role, as rooters, disturbing soil and breaking up roots. That behavior can be incredibly destructive in the wrong context, or surprisingly regenerative in the right one. By understanding these natural behaviors, we can use species to mimic ecological processes and repair the damage caused by extractive agriculture. Now, this is a good time to point something out. Savannas aren't the universal ideal. I've used them throughout this video as a reference point, because here in northern Namibia, they represent a healthy, functional ecosystem. But ecosystems exist along, I think you can guess it, a spectrum, defined by how dominant woody plants are. On one end, you have open grasslands with almost no trees. Then come savannas, where grasses and scattered trees coexist. Next are woodlands, with increasingly dense tree cover. And finally, closed canopy forests, where woody vegetation dominates and sunlight barely reaches the ground. The ideal ecosystem depends entirely on the place. You wouldn't want to plant trees across the Eurasian steppe. You certainly wouldn't want to thin the canopy of the Amazon rainforest, where dense cover is essential to its ecological balance. But herbivory plays a role in all of them. Grasslands are ideal for grazers like cattle. Savannas benefit from mixed herds of grazers and browsers. Woodlands rely on browsers to help keep the understory open and push back against encroaching thickets, often invasive species. Forests support fewer herbivores, but often provide seasonal fruit and nut harvests, shared by both humans and wildlife. Whether we're restoring grasslands, managing savannas, or protecting forests, the role of herbivores must be tailored to the land. One great example of this idea in action is New Forest Farm, run by Mark Shepard in southern Wisconsin. The land was historically oak savanna and woodland. Shepard has restored it using ecological principles and intentional livestock management. He doesn't see herbivores as problems to be contained, but as agents of disturbance and recovery. From his website, New Forest Farm is a planned conversion of a typical row crops grain farm into a commercial-scale, perennial agriculture ecosystem using oak savanna, successional brushland, and eastern woodlands as the ecological models. Between the tree crops, the grassy alleys are often grazed by cows, pigs, turkeys, sheep, or chickens. These systems are building soil, retaining water, sequestering carbon, diversifying habitat, and cultivating the human being and our ecology. Shepherd's Farm produces meat, wool, hides, and manure, fertilizer, alongside tree crops and perennial food systems. The result is a resilient ecosystem with minimal inputs and maximum diversity. Just imagine if more of our croplands looked like this. We have the tools, we have the knowledge. We could restore ecosystems across the world while building diverse food systems that are resilient, regenerative, and rooted in ecology. We've seen how herbivores and plants are part of a dynamic, living story, one with no clear beginning, only constant interaction. An ancient and enduring balancing act of consumption and dependence has shaped an incredible diversity of forms and ecological roles. That diversity doesn't just support ecosystems, it benefits us directly. Phytochemicals that protect plants become the basis of our medicine. The skins from herbivores and the tannins used in plant defense let us make leather, one of the most fundamental materials in human history. These relationships helped shape human civilization itself. We've also seen what happens when that balance is broken: environmental degradation on a massive scale. And we've seen how to reverse it. Whether wild or domestic, herbivores are an essential part of not just the natural world, but human life.